Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 37 of Divergent Dialogues. Today, we are really lucky to have a special guest, Marni Kammersell. How are you today, Marni?
I'm good. Excited to be here with you.
Thank you for joining us. Marni Kammersell is a neurodivergent educator, consultant, and parent to three neurodivergent kids. She specializes in helping families create liberatory, neuro-affirming educational environments and is passionate about self-directed education, the neurodiversity paradigm, and non-coercive relationships. A doctoral student researching neurodivergence and self-directed learning, Marni has over 15 years of experience in alternative education, including homeschooling, unschooling, democratic schools, and forest schools. So I've already got lots of questions just reading.
Mm,
I'm really sorry to get off track straight away, but what's a forest school?
yeah. So a forest school is nature, outdoor education, but it's often like in the States, there are a lot of forest schools for really young children. Like there are a lot of forest preschools. And I think even in Scandinavia and parts of Europe, there are what used to be called like walled kindergartens. So taking little children and big, snow gear out into the woods and spending their time in nature. And I ran a nature homeschool co-op for 12 years. So forest schooling is something near and dear to my heart, especially because a lot of the education is really child driven and the adults are there to guide, and to scaffold things a little bit, but really more along the lines of like safety boundaries is how I set that up. So yeah, it's a pretty cool sort of idea around learning from the environment as well as, spending time with friends in nature.
That's amazing. It sounds so wholesome. Like I just wonder if my schooling experience was like that. Yeah, what that would have been like. So that's amazing. Anyway, sorry to get off track, but I was just like, wow.
No, that's fine. And it's funny because wholesome, like that's how it felt. It was like so wholesome and I like loved that so much for my children. And then I had a child who was like, I will not go outside. I will not put on snow gear. I will not wear rain gear, Like one of the phrases is there's no bad weather, there's only bad clothing.
Yeah.
And that child was definitely like, no, there is bad weather. So, I think it can be a really amazing fit for some kids and some families, and then also just really normalizing that for some children it does not work, and that, screen-based or technology-based education is really what they're more drawn to, especially when we're talking about neurodivergent families.
Yeah.
I have to say, I feel like that is such an important point for us all to remember and a message to really talk about sometimes because yeah, that forest school, my brain just instantly went into this calm, relaxed, ready to learn state, thinking, oh my goodness, this is amazing. But you are so right that there are so many, children and adults alike that very much so, no way, no, that sounds horrendous, do not ask me to do that, and they thrive in tech-based learning. And then there's some kids that actually do still thrive in the learning setup that we have had forever, years and years and years. And as much as I advocate for change around the way we do learning, for some kids that is actually still what works for them. And I think it can be so easy to get caught up in thinking that these new ideas, which are amazing and we so badly need them incorporated, but not forgetting about the other kids who like the old school stuff. Especially the tech-based learning. I think it's like for me, I'm a tech-based learner. I need to hear you talk about it, write some stuff down, and maybe watch a YouTube clip with videos or something. So I need all the technology, but outdoors would be nice.
Yeah, and I think it's, when we're talking about technology, I think it's always important to think about connection, like how are children getting connection? And sometimes, that can go both ways. Like sometimes you see a child who's in front of a screen and they're playing Minecraft, and parents worry, like, oh, they're alone. But actually, they feel really connected because they're playing with an online friend. And like that online friend is joining them in a world where they are able to participate more fully than they sometimes are able to in the real world, where, again, like maybe it's too bright out or it's too cold or all those things, like some of those sensory things are too hard for them to be able to be fully present in the way that they can in Minecraft. But then at the same time, like in schools, they're bringing in so much technology and just making sure that the connection is there too.
Yeah.
In my master's research, I did a qualitative study around what are they called? Gosh, this is terrible. It's my own research. MMORPGs, and looking at, I guess, the benefits, the social benefits, and yeah, I think that there's a lot of stigma around gaming, and obviously, like anything, things in moderation. Like I think sometimes when people, children are sitting on there for like hours and hours and hours and hours, like, obviously there needs to be a balance with other things. But for a lot of neurodivergent kids, they very much use that as like regulation. And for some of them, that might be their only method of social connection. So you're completely right, Marnie. It's, we have to, look at it a bit more holistically and see like, okay, well, maybe gaming for long periods of time is impacting on other things in life, but like what's like, obviously this child is spending so much time here, like they must be getting something out of this. So
Right. Yeah.
and even just the process of like, especially MMORPGs, or like I think a really popular one at the moment is like Fortnite. You're, in order to play the game, you're kind of forced to play with other people. So it kind of builds some of those those skills to be able to communicate. And if someone's a little bit nervous, having that like you're an avatar, you're not a person, so it kind of gives that degree of separation where they might have a little bit more confidence. And also they're focusing on a special interest, and they are what do I say, I guess there's a bit of a rhythm or a process to it as well. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to mention my master's research because it was relevant.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and I know that when my children were young, Fortnite or like shooter games, I was definitely like nervous about them. And now I have an almost 16-year-old and feel very comfortable with a wide range of games. I think as they get older, and when you know your children well and you're, not making gaming into an enemy. So instead you're like engaging with them, like, tell me about this game. What do you like about this game? And I've learned a lot that way about what is great about Fortnite. And how exactly what you said, like it's a team game that they're working together and doing all these things as a team. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's not like these games, they're not the enemy.
My my young son, he's 12. He's an ADHDer, and he also has like a mild cognitive delay. So communication stuff is quite tricky for him. And he loves Fortnite. And I've actually noticed, I'd heard somewhere, I might have read a journal article about how games like Fortnite can help build skills with, impulse control, communication, because of the strategic nature of the team play and so forth. And I thought, okay, because just like you said, Marnie, the shooter games made me a bit, I don't really like that. Why do we need all that violence in our day? But I relented and let him play, and I believe that I can see benefit from that with impulse control and communication, being able to slow down to get his message across to me when we're talking, because he very often kind of gives me little pockets of the information, and I've got to try and fill in the blanks. But he's really developed those skills, and he's also the complex thinking as well. I love listening to his ideas on how to solve basic problems, that we have. So yeah, I think there is good value.
I'm going to do a little bit of a U-turn here, if that's okay, because yeah, I got excited by the forest schools. So Marty, I'm really curious, like what kind of brought you to the work that you do? Like you know, usually we have a bit of a story or something that inspired us or moved us in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, the forest school was something that I did. I mean, I'm still homeschooling and unschooling my children, but that was sort of, I would say, like the backbone of how we did education for a long time. And then things shifted as they do with children who are growing up. And my kids were kind of ready for something different. And at that point, I really, well, and the pandemic happened, which kept everyone at home for a long time. And so that also was kind of a breaking point that things had to change. But once the world opened back up, I think I would have loved to have world schooled and gone traveling for multiple years. And with the stress of the pandemic, our family, like many others, started to recognize some stress signs in our kids that brought us to explore neurodivergence and led me to realize that I'm an autistic ADHDer, late identified 3 years ago at this point, at 39. And so since no one else in my family wanted to go travel for years, I was like, fine, I'll do a doctoral program. So,
Of course, logical conclusion.
you know, yeah, so that's what I've been doing. I'm a third year doctoral student now. I'm about to start the dissertation process, and it's a doctorate in education. And my focus is on neurodivergence and self directed education. So that's kind of how I got to there. I've also been doing consulting for the past 3 years, so working directly with families, often families that are, well, neurodivergent families who are considering homeschooling or homeschooling families who are learning about neurodivergence. Kind of goes in both directions. Although I will, I think it varies depending on where you are. Where we are, near Boulder, Colorado, the homeschooling community is very widely neurodivergent, even though not everyone uses neurodivergent labels, but just the families that are willing to sort of be like, I could do this better than this system. They tend to be neurodivergent families or families who think, that system really didn't serve me. I want to try something different.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, if there was a Venn diagram of like alternative education, neurodivergence, like I feel like it'd almost be a circle.
Mhm.
Like there'd be so much overlap, I think.
Yeah, definitely in places like Colorado. I mean, I hear from friends who are in more religious areas of the United States in particular that homeschooling communities look very different. But I've homeschooled in Washington, D.C. area and in Boulder area, and both of those areas were very neurodivergent kind of communities that are very easy to find your people.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously there's benefits for the children, but there must be benefits for the parents as well, like having that community and being able to connect with other neurodivergent parents that are going through similar fun times and struggles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the flexibility, I think, is another reason that people really love homeschooling, is just as a homeschooling lifestyle. Like, it's not just about the education, it's also about, like, we only go to the zoo in the middle of the week. Like I would never go to those kinds of public places on like a Saturday if I could ever avoid it. So there are those sorts of perks that you get used to when you're homeschooling.
Yeah, that's such a good idea. Yeah, if I can avoid going somewhere on the weekend that's busy, I'll do that as well. So,
I
yeah.
think as a mum who did public school with my three kids, they're all in high school now, so they get themselves to school because it's just across the road. But one of the things that is coming up for me that would be very appealing about homeschooling would the opportunity to miss the pickups and drop-offs. From a mum perspective, there was a real social pressure there to talk to the other parents that were there for pickups and drop-offs, and that was just, oh my goodness, it felt like torture, absolute torture, because I never knew what to say, I never knew what to do. It was just, yeah. And I think homeschooling, not having to do that, would be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and also just being able to let your kids sleep.
Mm.
to be able to follow their natural body rhythms, because the school days are not set up to match, especially when they get to be like the teenager years. Their sleep cycles change and their bodies are really telling them to go to bed later and sleep much later into the morning. So that has been a huge benefit for our teenager in particular. But I think one of the things I love about it is just how flexible it is in terms of customizing for children. And so, if you have a kid who is really wanting to do a lot of classes and do a lot of things and be with people every day, there are ways to do that. And if you have a kid who is like, I only want to be with people maybe one day a week or not at all, I just want to do things online, there's just so much flexibility in that way.
I think a sticking point for a lot of parents is that morning school rush, and there can be a lot of stress for parent and child, and you're kind of setting up the day already stressed. So I could imagine just, obviously getting up, having breakfast, there might be a little bit of a routine in the morning, but just eliminating that for a lot of families would probably make a really big difference.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a client that I see. She's a mum and she has a young son. He has a PDA profile, and she had him going to like daycare, which wasn't really working. He was really struggling with that, and came time to consider school because he was that age. And it was a really, really tough decision for her to choose homeschooling because of all of the, those social expectations and all the things. But she did it, and watching him grow over the last year or two. He'll come in when his mum comes to see me, and he once couldn't even talk to me or look at me. And now, because she's doing the homeschool curriculum, but gives him the space to draw from his interests in the learning space. And oh my goodness, the things that this young boy tells me blows my mind. He has like the coolest facts about the most coolest things, and his confidence is, I think, the thing that stands out to me the most, seeing how that confidence has developed, and how he is so well educated, but probably beyond kids, in the public system, because he's absorbing all this information around things he's interested in. And it certainly makes for a very interesting, genuinely engaging conversation with, 6-year-old.
Yeah, so I think I'd really love to know a little bit more about self-directed education, because I think that's a good segue into that, because it sounds like what Tina's talking about very much aligns with that. So I guess, like, what is self-directed education, and I guess what benefits have you seen from that?
Yeah, so self-directed education is really the idea that children are full human beings, not just little people that we're trying to mold to be future adults, and that they should have autonomy and a right to choose how to spend their days as much as we're able to provide that. And so in self-directed education, there are different kinds of it. It's kind of an umbrella term that includes unschooling, which is what my family does, which is a home-based form of self-directed education, as well as like center-based or community-based forms of education, which might be Sudbury schools, or which is a kind of democratic education where children and facilitators kind of help to make decisions in a democratic process. There's also agile learning centers, which is another form of self-directed education. But really, the basic idea is that children learn all the time from doing the things that they're interested in, and that there should be adults available to help them do the things that they're interested in doing, and that through doing those things, they will educate themselves, essentially. One of my favorite resources is the Alliance for Self-Directed Education. And they have a list of like the 6 optimizing conditions for self-directed education, which includes things like access to multi-age peers. So a free age mixing with a variety of different aged people. These are really aimed more at center based, but I think they're also helpful for unschooling families to think about like, well, how can I make sure that I offer to my child that they can interact with people of different ages, right? And so this is really a form of education that's about like expanding boundaries and options, and instead of making the world smaller, which is what people sometimes worry about when they hear about a child not being in school. And I think that, for many years as a homeschooler, I really was deeply immersed in community, like when I was running my forest program, and my children were seeing the same friends, 3 times a week at different events that we would do. And we would go to field trips together, and we would go do science activities together. And I really just had this gorgeous homeschooling community and felt like homeschooling was just this wholesome experience. And as I've become more immersed in the neurodivergent community in particular, including the neurodivergent families that don't always get seen in those kinds of big homeschool group events, the same way that in schools there are sort of, the perception of how things go, and then there are some of the neurodivergent children that don't fit that mold and their experience is really different. And so now I'm a lot more sensitive to also saying that sometimes there are unschooled children who they don't want to be spending a lot of time with people of all different ages. Like they really want a more controlled environment. Sometimes they might be going through burnout. I work with a lot of PDA families in particular whose children are going through burnout and who are doing, sometimes they're coming to unschooling because they're philosophically drawn to it. Sometimes they're coming to unschooling because that's the only possible thing for a child who says, I will not do anything an adult tells me to do ever. Just period. And so then sometimes it's parents who are like, okay, well, I've heard that there is this kind of education where we kind of do what the kid wants, and I think that's what we have to do. So help me understand what that looks like. And so that might look like you play Minecraft with them for months, and that over time, as they feel more safe and as you are really immersed in their world, that slowly new things come in, like, oh, would you like to, look at this book about biomes with me? Or, oh, would you like to, I don't know, go on a scavenger hunt or something like that? And so, I would say that is one thing about it, is it can be really exhausting for parents that are trying to facilitate this kind of education, especially if you also have your own projects and life or, goals that you're trying to do. And so it can be really beautiful, and it can also be really tiring, really hard.
Yeah, I could imagine.
How do you support the parents who are feeling exhausted by it? Because it is a like a beautiful way to educate your children, and I think that there's so much value there, but you're right. It can be so exhausting if you're the parent who's trying to be your own self and give all of this to your child. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot with parents about sometimes parents come in thinking like, oh, I have to be fully responsible for this young person's education. Like I need to be, and often they're like, I need to get books about grade level standards and make sure that like they're keeping up, And so one of the things that I help families think about is that those kinds of standards are really arbitrary, and that actually in unschooling, it's a completely different philosophical approach where you just are really honest that like there are going to be things that any person doesn't know, and that all of us are really good at some things and not as good at other things, and that it's an interconnected human experience that we're going to like trust that over time they will learn the things that they need to know. And that some of that is also about bringing in other people to help you. Again, like if you have a child who's more flexible, or you have a child who enjoys group activities or even online classes, there are a wide range of opportunities. And so I have lots of those that I talk with families about, like, oh, you might check out this person's online classes or this person's offerings or this group activity. And then for kids who are not necessarily open to those kinds of things, who don't want to be, because, really so many opportunities for children are very adult directed and very, they're very top down. And part of that is that the ratios are often, if you have even 4 kids and 1 adult, well, somebody has to make the decision. And so, like in my forest school, we did a lot of helping the children to decide. And so that's kind of what like a democratic process would be looking at, is kind of coming to a consensus and working together. But again, if you have a child who's like, I need to do what I need to do at all times, then I talk to parents about, okay, so at this age and this stage, it's probably going to be one-on-one. And so you need to be thinking about, are you able to bring in other adults that could spend time with your child? Or sometimes like even a teenage, like helper is another possibility that you might be able to find locally, but trying to figure out how can you bring in other people to be part of your child's life and to help engage in the things they're interested in.
Through this process, like as a parent, like you've learned a lot as well. Like did you find that yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm making an assumption here, but like, did you go through conventional schooling when you were growing up?
I did, but I also was, it wasn't a very conventional path because I was not someone who enjoyed the system very much. And so, so I was identified as gifted young, and I really leveraged that to get as much autonomy as possible. So I would sort of be like, well, I did your year's worth of math curriculum and it's November, so can I go to the library now? And, often in the place where I was in the Midwest, they didn't have gifted programming, and they pretty much were like, okay, like they didn't know what to do with me. And so by high school, I ended up leaving high school early and starting college when I was 16. So I did go through a public school experience, but I also kind of found ways to work the system at every level.
Yeah, no.
Real life Doogie Howser.
I know, right? Except that, like, I think all I really wanted was to be left alone to read. Like, that's really what I wanted. It was just, let me just read. And I even said that to my mother at one point. She was an educator. My father was a professor. I think I was 12 or 13, and I was reading books by John Holt and sort of these alternative educational theorists. And I was like, I just want to unschool. Just let me stay home. I'll just read books. And she was not comfortable with that. So.
Oh wow. So even from very young, you were already had an interest in this.
I did, yeah. I got interested in sort of alternative education very young, and it's been a passion,
Yeah.
yeah, for a long time.
Yeah. So I guess as a parent, have you, I guess, curious, what are the most interesting things you've learned through this process as a parent?
Um, I think for me personally, I've always really been interested in how the mind works and sort of psychology. So I read a lot of like Oliver Sacks and that sort of stuff as well. And then, it's interesting how like the threads of your life kind of all go together. Like for my master's work, I worked on medical ethics. And so, I didn't do a lot of disability sort of studies at that time, but medical ethics is pretty adjacent to that. And so then, like, neurodiversity, I think when that sort of started coming up, so for us, it started that when my oldest was around 8 and writing was still really hard, that I was like, I wonder if this is dysgraphia. And so that was kind of like the very first beginnings. But more broadly, my kids tell me wild facts all the time that that they've come up with, especially my oldest, is just constantly coming up with things that, did you know? Like, no, I did not know that.
My favorite way to start a sentence. And
Yeah.
if someone starts a sentence with that, I'm like, wait, let me listen. Because I probably don't know and I want to know.
Hmm. And half the time I can't even follow the did you know, but I try.
The smile and nod. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, I think like a common concern that a lot of parents tend to have when it comes to unschooling is that, that there is that perception that in traditional schooling, there's that structure that they're going to follow this set curriculum that children aren't going to be able to learn the skills or the things that they need. But I mean, I can say for myself, like I went through traditional schooling, and particularly as a undiagnosed ADHDer, I probably tuned out to about 80% of it, to be honest. Like, and not by choice, just because that's what my brain did. And even thinking back now, I had my strengths and my challenges, and like I remember, I don't know what grade it was, but like for me, like rote memory is something that I really struggle with. And I just made a decision. I'm like, I'm not going to learn my times tables because I can just use a calculator. Like, and yeah, like things like that. Like I had to just, like, similar to what you were saying, Marnie, like learn what my strengths and my challenges were and just kind of work with it anyway. And it can be really frustrating as a neurodivergent person or a neurodivergent child when you're told, like, you should be able to do this, you need to do this, and you're just like, well, my brain literally can't do it, so I'm just sitting here twiddling my thumbs. And I still don't know my times table. Like, if you ask me to do times tables in my head, I don't know. I need to get a calculator out, because I just maths in my brain, it just doesn't compute. Like, if it's a sensual, amazing experience of imagination, awesome, but if it's numbers, my brain just like, eh.
And similar to like having to do your spelling words and your spelling tests where you need to stand there and just put those letters in order. That is really stressful for me. I'm a terrible speller, but yet I one of my strengths in my professional space, my personal space, is writing. I can write a really good report, and my spelling issue doesn't factor in. I still need to say the little rhyme, Betty eats cakes and Uncle sells eggs, to be able to spell the word because, which my third grade teacher taught me, because I just could not spell that word, and I couldn't move on to the next spelling list until I got it. And she was brilliant. She was such a brilliant teacher. She sat there with me and gave me this little rhyme. We repeated it over and over and over again. And here I am at 41, still can't spell the word unless I say the rhyme.
That's so cute. That's so cute and wholesome. And yeah, so I think um like in reality, a one size fits all approach isn't going to work for every child. And I would particularly say for neurodivergent kids, particularly autistic kids, where like our special interests are a big thing for us and we may have that monotropic focus, um, you know, being able to connect differing topics to our special interest, that makes such a big difference in being able to engage and remember. Like for me, like as I said, rote memory, it's not a great thing for me. But if I can go, okay, this is my topic, how can I relate this back to my interests? My brain's on fire. Like, all things are firing and I'm going to remember. So, I can see unschooling and self-directed education to, I mean, not just for neurodivergent kids, I just think for any kid, but obviously particularly neurodivergent kids, would be so helpful for them to be able to actually hold on to this information and these skills in a way where they can go forward in their life and actually use it in a way that it's going to be useful and helpful for them.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also like there is a big trust factor, and but that gets easier as you spend time with self-directed children because you see that, oh, this thing that, maybe we tried 6 months ago, all of a sudden is coming easily to them now, or so they may, especially if they are dyslexic, for example, spelling is really hard for a lot of dyslexic people. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that spelling will always be a huge challenge, but it often comes more easily at a much later age. And sometimes it is always difficult, and that's also okay, right? It's also okay to normalize, like, okay, you're probably not going to, you might need you might need support around this. Like, you might, as you said, Tina, right? Like, we have like all of these amazing technologies now
Mm.
where as adults, we're like, okay, great. Like, I can use speech to text if I want to in order to get my thoughts out. Or, I can use these different things that we have now in whatever areas are challenging. So if reading is hard, I can have it read aloud to me. Or, I just think that I think as adults, we have this understanding of, oh, these things are more interesting to me, more engaging to me. And so I'm going to focus on those things, right? I'm going to get help or support with the things that are more challenging. And yet we don't allow that for children. I think out of fear that, like, if we don't force them to, they won't learn. And yet, as you said, Caitlin, like, some of us still went through the public school system and there are still gaps, right? Because even though that system was like, well, you have to do it, it still wasn't something that was either possible or wasn't interesting enough at the time.
Still not
And so, yeah, I mean, schooled kids have gaps, homeschooled or unschooled kids are going to have gaps. And so it's not so much about that piece of information as it is about, like, how can you find the information that you need? How can we make you feel like a confident human being and a competent human being? And that's something that I think school often does a poor job with, not always. And it's not necessarily like, there are many wonderful educators who are doing their absolute best, but the way the system is set up, does not do a good job of helping children to focus on the things they love. It really is more set up to say, where are the challenges and let's focus on those. Whereas we really need to be saying, like, what do you love and how can we do more of what you love? Because when you do the things you love at a high level, that naturally will bring in other pieces and help you work on your challenge areas, but in a way that feels good and is exciting. The same as what you said, Tina, with like the video games, that like you're working on your emotional regulation because you're playing with a friend and you want to be able to like play the next lesson, the next level. And so, you are going to stick with it longer because you're in it in that moment.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I hear a lot about the the homeschooling, unschooling space is that, well, if children aren't in a classroom with all these different personalities, then they're never going to learn how to navigate all these different personalities, and that's what the real world is all about. But like you were just saying, Marnie, I think that when you are given the opportunity to focus in on what you love, you draw in the challenges that you have, the maybe your limitations, the things you're not so great at, because you might come up to a spot where you need to get better at this skill that doesn't come so naturally for you, so you can keep on that path of the thing you love. And that includes navigating different personalities, and figuring out, how do I be in this space, because I really need to go to this particular place, whether it's a virtual place or in real life, and I'm going to have to talk to these people or whatever it might be. If your need to get this new skill or be in this space is great enough, you're going to figure it out, and you're going to look to other resources to try and figure out, how do I navigate this space, these people, and yeah, you work it out because you need to. If there's no great need, then you're probably not going to put your energy into it.
Yeah, I was going
Yeah.
to say, I can say for myself at least that on an intellectual level, I know how to navigate it, but doesn't mean I want to.
Yeah.
I want to navigate these personalities. And I was also going to say, like, when we're telling children that there's one way to do something, and for whatever reason, particularly due to neurodivergence, they're not able to achieve that, we're creating a lot of shame And as you said, Marnie, like these days, there's so much technology, there's so many alternatives. And, imagine instead of being like, okay, like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, the child being like, I can't, versus you need to do this, oh, I can't do this. Okay, well, let's look at an alternative. Like how can we go about this? How can we meet, this learning or this topic or whatever in a way that suits you? Like, the trail to get there might look a little bit different, but the inherent goal is still there. And just time and time again, I've worked with children who like maybe dyslexic or dyscalculic or whatever, and they feel like they're so inherently flawed because they can't do this thing that apparently it's so easy for everybody else. And for someone so young, that makes such a big difference to their self-esteem. And then they're going to school every day, and it's just a reminder of what they can't do.
Yeah, there's a lot of people with a lot of school trauma for sure. And I guess just I've had so many experiences with my own kids of when we did do more eclectic homeschooling and I was trying to do more sort of, oh, I think this would be really good for you to do next, and so I would, and we still had, as eclectic homeschooling as a form of homeschooling that is not fully home unschooling, but is kind of like, it's more of a dance between the adult and the child in terms of like, well, what do you think about this? Or what do we explore this? But I had lots of experiences where I'd be like, oh, we haven't done math. Like, oh, go to get the child to do math. And then, find them working on something that is so intricate and so much more nourishing to them than the thing that I had in mind, right? And that also, I think that the things we love are the things that stick with us. The things that other people impose on us, if they don't feel like something that we're drawn to, are not things that we're going to retain. I think that's also part of why I always felt really comfortable with moving into an unschooling kind of framework is, and like, yeah, I mean, I aced pretty much everything. I was really good at learning for the test and then forgetting it the next day because most of it didn't matter. It was only the things that I personally cared about were the things that I retained. Now, I will say that my husband is different. I think in terms of like, he's like, oh, I remember that from sixth grade. I'm like, I don't even remember sixth grade, like at all. So people are different. And some people, as you were saying in the beginning, Tina, like there are kids who enjoy being led through a series of curriculum, right? That they are like, I enjoy going and having someone who has come up with a thoughtful plan for my day, and I'm going to get exposed to a wide variety of things. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's really just that I want kids to feel empowered. That if they're like, this is not the place for me, this is not the right environment, that they feel like, and that they will be listened to, and that there would be alternatives. Like, that's what I want for all kids. I mean, I talk to my kids all the time about their school options. Like, you could try this program, you could do this, you could go 5 days a week. So far, they've all been like, why in the world would I want to go sit in a building for 5 days a week? But, I think that that's a pretty unschooler kind of experience when you have had the freedom to piece together things. But that's not true for all families. I do know a couple of families where the kids said, yeah, I do want to go to school. Like I want that experience. I want to be with friends for all of, 5 days a week. I want to be doing things together in a group. And I think that's valid too. I just really want there to be so many more choices.
Yeah, I think when like the way things are set up now, that going to the building, being with people and learning that way, it's so championed as the right way and the thing we're supposed to strive for. And when there is in anything we're talking about, when there's just one thing that is put on a pedestal and everybody, like all the parents, all the kids are trying to be good at doing it this way, then it really does overshadow all those other really great ways of doing things and skill building. Because yeah, you're right, some kids, they get a lot out of the togetherness, being with people all day, but other kids need none of that stimulation so they can learn, but then they've also got the social energy to go and connect, whether it be online or in person later on. And yeah, equally, when you're trying to get your kids into that learning environment and they're just so drained because all their energy's gone into navigating the social while trying to learn, while trying to sit still, all that kind of stuff, then we're really worried about why does my kid withdraw at the end of the day and not speak to anyone for hours and hours and hours. I think they might be depressed. And it's like, well, they've just got no energy left. There's their bucket's empty.
Yeah.
I just keep having this image come up, and it's not necessarily like directly education related, but there's this meme that was going around, or this little cartoon, and it was of a parent and a child, and the parent was basically saying, like, I want you to do as you're told and all this sort of thing now, but when you grow up, I want you to be independent and autonomous and all this kind of thing, kind of being like showing it's like, oh, well, that's kind of absurd. It's like you're teaching a child from really young to conform, fit in. But then when they grow up, it's like, oh, I want you to go off into the world and be independent and autonomous. And it's
follow your own path.
Yeah, follow your own path or whatever. And, people might have varying, different things that they want to do when they grow up. But it's kind of like, to me, it makes sense that you would start that encouragement in that process when they were children. Not be like, okay, you're 18 now, like switch.
Yeah, it's such a bizarre thing, isn't it? Although I talk to young people about this so often that it's like, today you're 17 and you have to ask permission for everything, be told what to do, and in some situations literally still put your hand up and seek permission to pee. But tomorrow, you've just turned 18. You need to run your whole entire life independently and not make mistakes, know how to make decisions, have, forethought, all of this stuff. It is so bizarre that, yeah, it's quite simply your birthday happened. One day you have to ask permission to pee. Tomorrow you need to navigate the world on your own.
Yeah. Permission to not needing to ask permission to use the bathroom has been my kind of one of my bars for like whether I would consider a program for my kids. I'm like, I consider using the bathroom like a basic human right,
Yeah.
And those of us with PDA kids, I think, learn this when our kids are much younger because they won't be controlled, and so that I've seen that cartoon too, Caitlin, and I think that is like parenting PDA kids is really, really challenging a lot of the time. And yet one of the beautiful things is they're like, I know that this child knows what they like, and I know that they are deeply connected with their no, Whereas like sometimes for other kids, especially neurodivergent kids who maybe end up masking more or more people pleasers, we have to really work to connect them with their no. Like that's a big part of the work for parenting those children is like, it's important that you are able to and like empowered to say no when something is not a good fit for you. And so, yeah, we learn so many lessons from our neurodivergent kids.
Definitely.
I feel like we could talk about this for ages, but we're probably getting to the running out of time portion of. That's the thing that sucks with podcasts. Sometimes you're getting into it, and then otherwise, I don't know. I think the average for podcasts is like 30 to 45 minutes or something like that. Otherwise, you lose people. I put things on times too. So.
Yeah, I do too.
Marni, like usually for our guests at the end, we just give you a little bit of space to like plug anything that you've got coming up, or like we will put Marni's website in the show notes. But like, is there anything that you kind of wanted to share, like for your own business or anything that's kind of coming up soon?
People can reach me via Substack is a great place to connect. My website has my email. I enjoy working with parents and families. I'm also going into my dissertation process, and I'm trying to stay off social media, as many of us are. So just, But it's always nice to connect with people who are sort of thinking about these topics. It's kind of a nice break from the news cycle these days too, to be like, yes, let's think about how can we support neurodivergent families, whatever the world throws at us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and having this discussion with us, Marnie. I think a lot of people will get a lot out of this episode.
thank you. It's a lot of fun.